Well, we're moving through the Old Testament this year, and we come up to a little book. It's 4 chapters long, which is pretty short for an Old Testament book especially. It's the book of Ruth. Ruth can sometimes be read in a single setting, which is, we're going to go through the whole narrative today in a single setting, not read all of it, of course. But it can also be bypassed because it's not got some of these intense stories in it, but it's a beautiful picture. It's really, I think, a picture of what it means to have character in life. Character. Somebody has once told me, either you have character or you are a character. So you get your choice, what kind of person you want to be. And we see this character developed in Ruth's life time and time again, and how that led the opinions of others about her to be carried in such a way because of the nature of the character that she had in her life. We're going to dive right in and jump into this story even right now. We begin in Ruth chapter 1, and the first thing I'd like to say is that Ruth's character was developed one moment at a time. The story was that there was a man who he and his wife and his sons left the land of Israel because of a famine in the land. And we pick it up at verse 3. Now Elimelech, the man, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons in this foreign land. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died, and Naomi was left with without her 2 sons and her husband. So, a woman in that day left without men for support was in trouble. Now she had these daughters-in-law who were foreign women, and she was living in their foreign land, trying to figure out what to do with life. Verse 6, when Naomi heard in Moab, by the way, is on the opposite side of the Dead Sea, so they kind of traveled over and down, and they were away from the homeland. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of the people back in Jerusalem, by providing food for them, famine was over, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. So far in the story, not only she is headed there, Naomi, but both of her daughters-in-law are going to go with her. They're going to leave Moab, and they're going to go back to Judah, to the land of Jerusalem, nearby, really where they're from. It's Bethlehem. They're going to go there and travel together. And the first thing I like to say is this character trait in her developed a reputation. It's in verse 8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, go to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness," is the word, "as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Like, don't follow me. You're going to a foreign land. Nobody will want to claim you. You're just going to have to make it on your own. Go back to mom and find yourself another husband. This word kindness is from a Hebrew word. It's got a strange pronunciation, and I won't get it right. It's chesed. Chesed. And this word means kindness, faithfulness, love, loyalty, compassion, mercy, grace, all sort of wrapped into one. And so this was the reputation that Ruth was already building by the way that she treated not only Naomi's sons before they died, or maybe even in their death, but the way she treated her mother, their mother-in-law. Both Ruth and her sister developed this reputation as God had shown them this chesed, that she was showing that out to others, and it was a reputation. It's a pretty good reputation. I would say if you could have a reputation to build, and this could be the list of traits in your life, is chesed. You would have kindness, faithfulness, love, loyalty, compassion, mercy, grace. That's not bad on a tombstone. That's not bad. When the preacher is doing your funeral, you say, this is the list that you're known by. So Ruth's character was developed certainly one moment at a time, but also one word at a time. Her sister, the other woman, went back, listened. She left and went home. But Ruth replied, and this is the famous passage out of the book of Ruth, but look at these key words that are in here. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you, saying to her mother-in-law. Look at these words. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. Basically, where you're buried, I'll be buried. I mean, this statement that she's making, these power-packed words saying, I'm never going to leave you. From here to the rest of your life, I am going to stick with you. You have been not only a mother-in-law to me, you've been a mother to me, and I am going to remain faithful to you in all of those things. So her character was developed one word at a time, but then one step at a time. You can say something, you can intend something, you say, this is what I plan to do, but she did it. Verse 18, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until. Yeah, sometimes it's easy for me to bypass words in the Bible, like, went on until. But you got to think about this. I mean, they were in Moab. They were the opposite side of the Dead Sea. So they were east and then very far south of where they were headed. And they had to walk one step at a time, like one moment at a time. And you have to wonder, like, was she thinking, did I make the right decision? Were my words the right words? I mean, now that I'm walking and I'm walking through this really arid place and rugged place and through this hill country, and it's rocky and it's desert-like and like all of this stuff. And as she's walking, it's called the Dead Sea for a reason. That's on the opposite side of it. And walking, up and then back in across the Jordan River and in. I mean, like all of these things they had to do one step at a time. And I find that much of character is like that. Anybody can stand up here on a Sunday morning and for a few minutes give a sermon and do a thing. But my life is not measured by the sermons I give. I hope you know that. It's measured by the life that I live. And is it perfect? Lord, no. Ask anybody close to me, ask my family. It is not a perfect life. Your life is the same way. It's not measured by the statements you make. It's not measured by, I'm going to look at the crowd, your Instagram posts, well, never mind, Facebook posts. It is not measured by that stuff. Life is measured by those decisions, those steps, those moments at a time that we walk through that. You agree with me on that? I think this is one that I'm right on. And then, so this story goes on, verse 19. So the two men went on until they came to Bethlehem. There's a key word, the story of Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, it's been a decade, can this be Naomi? She goes on, don't call me Naomi. She told them, call me Mara, a word which means bitter in Hebrew. Because the Lord, the Almighty, has made my life very Mara, very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. You'll see this theme throughout the book of Ruth, going away full and back empty. And through the rest of the story, it's going empty and coming back full. Why call me Naomi? She said, the Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. You ever been there? When life is so hard and things are spinning out of control and you don't know which end is up. You think, God, why have you brought me to this spot? Listen, don't beat yourself up when you feel that way. Number one, God can take it. And number two, it's human to feel it. And so when you go through these just hard and difficult times, it's okay to cry out like Naomi has and saying, I feel abandoned. I feel lost. I feel lonely. I feel grieved, whatever it is. And I promise you, God can take it. Well, they arrived back at the time of the barley harvest. And to understand the barley harvest, there's lots of steps. I've reduced it to 4. Look, I'm not a barley harvester, so I had to look all this stuff up, so I'm doing my best here. But there were 4 things that I've kind of figured out that are the main steps. They were cutting, tying, thrashing, and winnowing. Cutting was done by the harvesters, which were men out in the field. They'd go just like through the field bit by bit, and they would take these scythes or sickles and cut them. And then they'd take all of these big stalks and carry them to the edge of the property, and that's where the tying was done by the women. So they'd go out in the middle of the field, they'd bring all the stalks over there, bring them to the edge of the property, and then lay them out there, and then the women would come and tie them up into these bundles, and they were transported for the thrashing, which was done on the threshing floor. And this thrashing was done either by a heavy tool or by oxen or something, where they would basically beat it and separate the kernel from the exterior shell so they could have just the grain itself. But then, of course, there was a mess in there, right? They would pick out the stalks, but there was a mess in there as it was beaten down. So the fourth step was winnowing, which would be done on a hilltop, sort of, or an area where the wind could blow, and they would throw it up in the air and with a big fork-like thing so that the chaff would blow away and they'd have grain left. I mean, there were a few small steps along the way that in my research I found, but these are the main 4 steps that we can see. Now, to understand what Ruth does here in chapter 2, it says she's doing the gleaning, and she's right behind the harvesters in the middle of the field. And Ruth the Moabite said to her mother-in-law Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Well, Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters, behind the men. And this was an important step. Just because they had returned to a place where the famine was over doesn't mean they had food. Because remember, like, women didn't have jobs. They were dependent upon men to be able to support them and to feed them. And so begging was one option. Prostitution was an option. There was a provision in the Bible, in the Old Testament, for women and people, the poor, to be able to go in and glean behind the harvesters. And it actually was written into the law that God said, because he understood that there were sometimes people that needed this. And this is what she did. She was, by the way, when she was there, she was spotted by Boaz. That name is going to be familiar here. And Boaz, he was the boss, and he owned it. And he went to the harvester, the overseer of all the harvesters, and he said, "This woman out here that's working, who does this woman belong to?" Interesting phrase. He didn't ask, who is she? What's her name? Who does she belong to? It's one of relationship. Is she one of the harvester's wives? Is she somebody from the community? I don't recognize her. I don't know her. And so then he ends up meeting her, and we get to this second gleaning that takes place in the story, and this one's behind the women. It's in chapter 2, verse 8. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women." So no longer does she have to work in the middle of the field. Now she can go to the border of the field where all the bundles are lying, and now the women are tying up these bundles. And of course, some stalks are going to get missed and some grain's going to fall. And so she didn't have to move throughout the entire large field, but just along the border, following the women. It was active, I believe, great grace that Boaz gave to her. And when this happened, she bowed down almost in reverence to Boaz and asked this question. She said, "Why?" She asked this man, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me?" And then she adds, "A foreigner. Why would you do this for me?" And he gives the reason. Remember I said character builds reputation? Here's another one of those moments where character builds a reputation. And Boaz replied, "I have been told all about you. I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland over in Moab and came to live with a people you didn't even know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Do you hear this reputation that's built by her character? Like, I've heard about you. I've heard the stories about you. And so she sits down and she has a meal, and she's invited to the table. I mean, this is crazy. If you understand that, like the context of the story, that she'd be invited. But it says at mealtime, just listen to this, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. He's being kind to her. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted, and she even had some left over. I mean, typically when a person went out to glean, they didn't eat for the whole day. They were just walking behind, they were gleaning, they were picking up, they were taking it back, and hopefully coming up with one day's worth of food. That's their goal, one day for the family to come back, and then to go home and to make a meal late in the evening, and then go back the next day and repeat, because they were poor. But he gave her food and gave her leftovers, which leads to this gleaning number 3 out of the side of number 2. Yes, it's behind the women, but listen carefully. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. Now, not only is she on the border, not having to walk the entire field, but he's instructed the women, take these bundles, pull some stalks out and leave them, and keep walking and leave them, so that when she walks along, she doesn't have to pick up like these little bits and pieces of grain. She gets to pick up entire stalk, like all kinds of it, that she can fill up her basket with. It is this incredible act of kindness that he is showing to her because of her character, because of her reputation. And then we get more character development that goes on in the story, and it's this, that her character was developed one grain at a time. It wasn't like they just said, back up the wagon and we'll get the forklift and we'll just load all the stuff on there for you. That's not how it happened. They left it. She still had to pick it up. And so it says, Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed. Remember threshing? It's hard work. You take it to the threshing floor, you beat it, you separate it, you winnow, you do all this stuff. She did this work. And it amounted to about an ephah. An ephah was maybe 30 pounds, 10 days worth of food, a haul. Remember, most people would go out and they would glean and maybe get one day's worth. But by these acts of kindness, she got a week and a half worth of food. Her character was developed in one moment at a time, one word at a time, one step at a time, one grain at a time, and then one day at a time. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. We might look at that and say, okay, that's pretty cool. The barley harvest was all of April. The wheat harvest was all of May. She spent 2 months doing this. Again, you can go out and anybody can look like a hero for a day or for a week. But to do it week after week after week after week after week, day after day after day after day, this was where the character development took place. And then her character was developed one choice at a time as well. This is where the story gets the romantic part that it's most famous for. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you'll be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours." That's a key phrase. He's a distant relative. Tonight he will be winnowing, the final step, winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Okay, that's information. Ruth says, all right, Mom, now what? And here's the instructions. Wash. Put on perfume. Get dressed in your best clothes. Not exactly gleaning outfit here. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Some people make this out to be like that she's offering herself to him. Well, yes, but not in the way that we would often think, I believe, in our culture today. It's much more about who he is and his relationship and what that is going to mean as the story moves forward. So she does all of this, and then it says, in the middle of the night, something startled the man, Boaz. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. It's not every day that you wake up and there's a spare person down there. Who are you, he asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Some English versions translate this as kinsman redeemer, guardian redeemer, kinsman redeemer. What is this? Remember that as God was having the biblical law written down, he was covering all of these different aspects of life. The people of God came out of Egyptian slavery where they'd been for 400 years, and they didn't know how to organize themselves into a society with rules and worship and law that made sense. And so God wanted to provide for those who would be poor, including in their culture, women. Women didn't get their husband's Social Security back in the day. Women couldn't go out and get themselves a job. Women couldn't pursue a college education. Women couldn't do the things that we're so accustomed to in our culture. And so God provided this for them. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 to 6. If you want to look it up, it's like the whole chapter deals with what to do with this in some regard. And basically what it says is that if there's a woman whose husband dies and she's got no one else to take care of her, then the dead husband's brother, would be responsible to marry her. And any children he would have with her, the firstborn male would be considered the son of the deceased brother, not his own son, but the son of the deceased brother. And if he doesn't do that, refuses to do that, then the next brother in line. And if there are no brothers, then it moves on to relatives who would marry this woman and take her on. It's basically to provide for her in a way that's very different than our culture. So when Ruth says in this statement, you are a guardian redeemer, you are a kinsman redeemer of our family, here's what she's saying. I am wearing nice clothes today. In fact, these are not clothes of mourning for my deceased husband, they're bridal clothes. And I am here today letting you know that as my guardian redeemer, my kinsman redeemer, I am available to marry you. Now, Boaz, we don't know much about other parts of his life, whether he already had a wife, in their culture, they had these things going on. We don't know much about that. But what we do know is his response, and just listen to this for a minute. It's in verse 10, then I'll move on. He says, the Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness, this chesed, this kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. She apparently was younger. She was good looking. She could have gone after people, and probably somebody would have said, okay, I'll take her. But he's looking at us and says, you've offered yourself to marry me. And he looked at that as a great kindness. You see, her character built her reputation. It goes on, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. And if you look carefully, she didn't ask any questions, but it was implicit in her statement when she said, you are a guardian redeemer for our family. You are a kinsman redeemer for our family. He knew what she was asking, that I am here, I will marry you. And he says, I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town, here's her reputation, know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I, not a brother, but another one. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. So lie here until the morning. Lie here until the morning. That Boaz, before they were done with the conversation, he also gave her what I call gleaning number 4. Remember, he was up there to do the winnowing, the final step, where all you have is just the pure grain. Boaz said, "Bring me your shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When he did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. 6 measures of barley. Some commentators believe this was a month's worth of food, 3 times what she gathered in the first day, or probably all the other days that she'd been coming. But they were now having a stockpile of food, and he just gives her this. These acts of kindness that are shown not only from Ruth to others, but from Boaz back to Ruth, are a symbol of what God does for us. His chesed, his kindness, his love, his compassion, his mercy, his grace. And now this man as the guardian redeemer for her and her family. Ruth's character was further developed one blessing at a time. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. There's a whole story in there we don't have time for. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in old age." In old age. There's one more piece of the reputation story that I want to lift up. I told Lisa last week, I said, "Hey, I'm preaching on Ruth this next Sunday." And she said, "Make sure you get that verse." I said, "Which verse?" She said, "Oh, you got to get that verse because it's the most beautiful verse in the whole thing." So in order to maintain my reputation, I'm going to include it in the sermon today. And it says this, this is what the women say, "For your daughter-in-law," taking of Naomi, "your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons." And has given him, that is your son, birth now. She's better to you than 7 sons. Why? I mean, she's going out and she's getting a week and a half worth of food at a time. Then she's getting 30 days worth of food at a time. I mean, she's got a reputation in the community. She's establishing the family again. Her mother and she are now going to have property. And they're going to be taken care of. They're going to be not only taken care of, like in a passive sense, but taken care of themselves in the world. What she has done here is greater than a whole family full of sons could have done for Naomi. What a reputation to have. I mean, what an incredible reputation for this woman to be able to have. And you think about what has happened here is that Boaz has come into her life. And Boaz has seen her as a person, yes, in need, but a person for whom he had responsibility as the guardian redeemer. And he took up that role. And by the way, they had a son, and that son had a son, King David. This foreigner. I actually didn't write it down. I think it's the great-grandmother. I'm blanking here for a moment. Of King David. You know who else? She's in the family line? Jesus himself, who becomes our ultimate guardian redeemer. He is the one who is redeemed of. Ruth wasn't worthy. She was a widow. She was a foreigner. She was poor. She was not worthy of somebody to go out and marry. Neither are we. When God looked at us and he said, "For you, I will send your guardian redeemer." His name is Jesus. Here's what 1 Peter says about this. Since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Jesus, our Redeemer. You see, Ruth is a bridge book. It's a bridge from the time of the judges to the time of the kings, because King David comes soon after that. It's also a bridge from law to grace, from Old Testament to New Testament, from the ways of God in the Scripture in the Old Covenant to the ways of God in the Scripture of the New Covenant. It's a bridge to Jesus himself. It's a picture of Jesus as our great guardian redeemer who has redeemed us even though you and I were not worthy of it. Brothers and sisters, today as we come before the Lord and we celebrate his supper, understand that this meal, this Holy Communion, is a symbol of this redemption. When Christ said, "This is my body, this is my blood given for you," it's a symbol of his guardian redemption, his kinsman redemption, his offering to redeem us from ourselves. As you receive today, receive it with his chesed.